And welcome back. Happy New Year. Happy 2019. This is American Football News on the final week, the final conclusion of the NFL regular season. For those of you who have been living under a rock for the past 365 days, the NFL concluded its regular season this past weekend with a plethora of games. Of course, there was no Monday night football game, but there was a Sunday night football game, which was pretty good. A lot of teams capped off great years. Several had disappointing. We all have the NFL playoffs to take a look at. And the first week's games for the playoffs will be this weekend, and that is the wild card round, probably the most exciting portion of the NFL playoff system. A lot of these teams were either really hot at the beginning of the year, maybe got some injury bugs or hit the skids or something like that, and then kind of limped into the playoffs. There's other teams that kind of started out pretty poorly and have been playing very, very well lately and are on a hot streak getting into the playoffs. So always a very interesting round. I always prefer the wild card over every other round there is in the playoffs. But quick a recap from week 17. The Buffalo Bills took on the Miami Dolphins this past weekend. The Bills not doing well this year. The Miami Dolphins not doing well this year. So really this game was meaningless, but tell that to the Buffalo Bills. They put the pedal to the metal and didn't let up at all. Putting on an offensive show, the Bills put up their final win of the season and defeated the Miami Dolphins 42-17. Switch over to the NFC, the Detroit Lions taking on NFC North rival Green Bay. Packers season was done several weeks ago. Detroit underperforming like usual, but still a lot of animosity between these two teams. And Detroit trying to do something that they hadn't done since the mid-'80s, and that was sweep the Green Bay Packers 2 years in a row. It's hard to think that the Lions have beaten the Green Bay Packers more in the last 2 years than the Green Bay Packers have beaten the Lions. And if Sunday's game was any evidence of it, I don't know a better way to showcase your talents. Lions beat the hell out of the Packers and serve up a goose egg 31-0. Switch over to the AFC again. New England put on a offensive clinic against the New York Jets, whose season comes to a disappointing end. They lose their head coach, or could be several coaches here. Patriots with the victory in that one, 38-3. New Orleans drops the final game of the year to NFC South rival the Carolina Panthers, but really it doesn't matter. New Orleans rested the players that they needed to, seriously looking to make a run here in the playoffs. This is my Super Bowl favorite, has been my Super Bowl favorite since probably week 4. So I think it was a good idea to sit back and relax and let the teams play. Cam Newton and the Panthers desperately looking for a win. They got one over the New Orleans Saints, but believe me, if New Orleans had wanted this one, they would have got it. Carolina wins 33-14. Switch over to a rivalry game. It's not very often that you would think the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants would be considered rivals, but at one point in time, these were the two top teams in the NFC duking it out, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, to make the Super Bowl or the NFC Championship. Cowboys really have everything to lose. New York had nothing to lose, and that's the way they played the Cowboys. Despite the fact that they benched most of their starters except for their star quarterback, Dak Prescott, the Cowboys were able to preserve and hold on for a very close 1-point win against the New York Giants, 36-35. Giants fans are in for a tough offseason. Looks like Eli Manning may or may not retire. I'm going to lean more towards May. Looks like Odell Beckham Jr. is on his way out, but you guys have Saquon Barkley, and you'll have a nice draft pick this upcoming year. So you'll have a nice replacement for Eli, and I think with Eli, you guys were more lucky than anything to win the Super Bowls. Maybe it was skill. Maybe he's the only one that knows how to beat Brady on a regular basis. But, good luck to Giants fans everywhere, and we'll see you next year. Move over again, continuing into the NFC. The Atlanta Falcons took on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, this game kind of meaningless. Falcons out, Tampa Bay Buccaneers out. But Matt Ryan and company still had a lot to prove. and wanted to make sure that the Bucs stayed at the bottom of the basement when it came to division standings, and that's just what they did. Falcons ended up winning 34-32. The Houston Texans took on the Jacksonville Jaguars. If this were 2018 or 2017 going into 2018, this would have been an intriguing matchup because Houston was underperforming and Jacksonville was overachieving. The situation has kind of flipped. Jacksonville has grossly underperformed this year with running back Leonard Fournette being denied any sort of extension or bonuses or anything like that on his particular contract. It sounds like he's going to be cutting ties with the Florida-based team. That could prove well for him. It could prove not well for him. Sometimes in situations like that, players aren't going to be picked up again by another team for fear of distraction. But Houston was not distracted in this particular game, taking it to the Jaguars to finish out the season with a win. Houston wins 20-3. Move over to L.A. and Denver. That is the L.A. Chargers. Phillip Rivers and company taking care of business this year and just absolutely beating people left and right. This time they add the Denver Broncos to that list of victims, pull out the victory 23-9. Kansas City took on rival Oakland this past Sunday to conclude the 2017 season, or 2018-2019 season. John Gruden and company have a lot of work ahead of them, but he's more than for it. He's gone all in into rebuilding the Oakland Raiders, and again, you got to remember this is a John Gruden who rebuilt an Oakland Raiders team into a Super Bowl contender, only to be traded away to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to face his former team in the Super Bowl, who he promptly beated with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But you also have to remember, this is the John Gruden that lost his locker room in Tampa Bay. Players didn't want to play for him. Nobody wanted to be there. And a huge change had to come. So really, which John Gruden is Oakland going to get? The savior that almost took them to the promised land again? Or is it going to be the one that turned on them and played them for the chance to win a Super Bowl, only to lose his team several years later? Only time will tell. Keeping with the West Coast theme, the Los Angeles Rams took on the San Francisco 49ers. Again, this game meaningless for the San Francisco 49ers, and the Rams punched their ticket to the playoffs several weeks ago. But an interesting matchup nonetheless. A high-scoring affair. San Francisco putting up more points this year than I think I've seen them put up all year, but they still fell short to the Rams 48-32. Go over to the NFC North and the underperforming Minnesota Vikings and Kirk Cousins, who had more money thrown at him than a Las Vegas stripper. The Chicago Bears are the kings of the NFC North, made the playoffs, and embarrassed the Minnesota Vikings this past Sunday, 24-10. Now the interesting part of the past weekend. The Pittsburgh Steelers took on the last-place Cincinnati Bengals in the AFC North. The Steelers had to win this game in order to get into the playoffs, but they also needed some help from another AFC North team, the Cleveland Browns, or the Baltimore Ravens, or a AFC South team, the Tennessee Titans. They needed help from one of those three teams plus a victory in order to get in. Now, this wouldn't have been a problem for Pittsburgh had they just picked up a couple wins earlier in the year, but it is what it is. Pittsburgh played a magnificent game despite not having Antonio Brown, and at the time, nobody knew why. We know now why Antonio Brown wasn't there, and had Brown been thrown into the starting rotation, I don't think the score would have been nearly as close. Pittsburgh pulls out the close win against the Bengals 16-13. However, we'll talk about those two games that were so important right away because we got to keep with this theme. The Cleveland Browns took on the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens fighting for their playoff lives just like last year, as was the Cleveland Browns. There was a statistical chance that the Browns could have made the playoffs this year, and the Baltimore Ravens. But the Steelers were the big question. If the Steelers had lost, they would have been completely disregarded from the 2018 NFL playoff. However, if the Cleveland Browns would have beaten the Baltimore Ravens, the Steelers would have gotten in. even if Cleveland didn't beat Baltimore, which they didn't, Baltimore pulled out a very close game, a squeaker of a win, 26-24 against Baker Mayfield and the Cleveland Browns. Before we continue, congratulations, Cleveland. You guys did a hell of a lot better than you did last year, and you did a hell of a lot better than the 0-16 Detroit Lions, who the next year only won 2 games. You guys tripled that, so good for you. Good things coming out of Cleveland. I hope you guys draft well and are able to keep the same team pretty much for this upcoming season. So, Steelers watching this game on the big screen. Cleveland drops it in a heartbreaker at the last second with an interception, so all eyes turn to Sunday night. That's right, the Indianapolis Colts taking on the Tennessee Titans. The winner of this game wins the AFC South, and the winner of this game goes to the playoffs. So huge implications in this game, and I really thought the Titans were going to show up to play. They haven't been to the playoffs in a couple years, but Andrew Luck said no. This is my year, this is my return, and this is my opportunity to showcase my talents. So we go back to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is watching this game because they know Baltimore won, and the only way to get in is for Tennessee to tie the Indianapolis Colts. It doesn't matter if the Colts win in overtime. If the Tennessee Titans can pull out a tie, they and the Steelers, provided the Tennessee Titans win, would go to the playoffs. However, Andrew Luck and the Colts were on point, and that was simply not going to happen. Colts ended up winning the Sunday night game in a great season finale, 33-17. Really quick, the Philadelphia Eagles, they had to win out just to make the playoffs, and they did. Under the same circumstances from last year, with the same quarterback. And this time they blanked the Washington Redskins in order to get into the playoffs. Your Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles are once again playoff bound with a victory over the Washington Redskins, 24-0. And we personally at American Football News are going to conclude this recap with the Seattle Seahawks-Arizona Cardinals game. If you're a Cardinals fan, this season stunk from the very beginning. You guys got rid of your head coach. That's no surprise right there. So only good things can come out of the desert. However, Larry Fitzgerald, your guys' number 1 wide receiver, is probably going to bounce after this year, either to a different team or retirement. I think it's about time for him. He got close to a Super Bowl. He's played in a Super Bowl. So, call it good. Just be grateful that you guys had an opportunity and you have nowhere to go but up. Seattle, on the other case, you guys turned it around way back then. Russell Wilson and company absolutely making sure that the playoffs are going to be in their future, taking it to the Arizona Cardinals early and often this past Sunday. Cardinals stuck with them, though, and kept the game interesting and close, but ultimately the Seahawks pulled out the victory 27-24. Okay, so if you're a fan of the NFL, you know the playoffs are this particular Saturday and Sunday. We have the wild card round. And be sure to check out my NFL playoff podcast, which will be broadcast shortly after this particular podcast. And check out our college bowl football results show. Even though the national title game hasn't been played, we'll give you the results of all the other bowl games that were being played this past year and who the national title game is between, if you haven't been paying attention to the local news. Anyways, our first game on ESPN ABC is at 4:35 Saturday, January 5th. That's the Colts and the Texans. I like the Texans. The next game will be Saturday, January 5th at 8:15. That will feature the Seattle Seahawks and the Dallas Cowboys. I like the Hawks. Switch over to Sunday, January 6th at 1:05. The Chargers will take on Baltimore. I like Phillip Rivers. And the final game for the wild card round for this Sunday will take place on NBC, Sunday, January 6th at 4:40. And will feature the Chicago Bears taking on the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. I like the Eagles. The LA-Baltimore game is on CBS. Thank you for listening.